Hey there, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo.
I'm Robin Grace. This is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And I don't even know what your topic is. I think I know what your topic is this week. My topic this week is a little bit more history-based, I think, which I always think is fun, little knowledge nugs for you folks. Adam, why don't you tell us what your topic is?
So my topic is pretty straightforward. It's actually just going to be theme park accidents, and I'll explain why I thought of that and then just jump into them. But before we get into either of our topics, Robin, how has your week been?
It's Monday, so it just started. We had a pretty fun weekend, did a bunch of stuff, kept busy, you know how we do.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. How about you? How things?
Oh, thank you for asking. I didn't really do a whole lot that was fun. I basically just cleaned this weekend and then ran around and gathered up a bunch of stuff that we needed to have back out in the house here in Vegas. And it was pretty boring. I made some dice. Some of them came out good. I made some new molds, which is cool. So that's fun. I hope my new molds work out. I'm going to test them out tomorrow.
Nice.
I haven't had any time today to do that. So, but yeah, it's been pretty quiet back here on the homestead. And pretty boring. I miss you. I will say that. Yeah, it's every waking moment is a eternity without you. So
guys, aren't we so disgustingly cute?
I mean, we try, but yeah, I'm happy to be doing a spooky. This is more scary, actually. It's Scaryish is the name of the show, and I decided to go with something that actually scares me. That's not supernatural. So I am excited to kind of cover that. But I think you're going to be going first, so I will turn over the microphone, as it were, to you.
All right, so this week I'm going to be doing some interesting history, I think. We're obviously the Scaryish podcast. We cover Scaryish topics, but witches aren't inherently scary. At least I don't believe they are. We've covered the topic of witchcraft or witch hunts or things like the Bell Witch in the past, but this time I'm going to cover a little history about someone who was kind of a turning point in history concerning witchcraft and the hunting of witches. And that person is Agnes Waterhouse, also known as Mother Waterhouse. And she was the first woman to be executed for witchcraft in England. And supposedly, she was one of the most influential witches of the Tudor period. And I say that, but it's not necessarily known whether or not she was an actual witch. So we'll just get into it. So Agnes was born sometime either in the late 1400s or early 1500s. It really depends on which source you read from, because some sources say it's 1470 something, and then some are 1500 something. So different sources, different data. What's more known definitively is that we know the date of her death. So the trial of Agnes Waterhouse is written about in a pamphlet that was published in 1566 titled The Examination and Confession of Certain Witches, which is spelled Wytches, at Chelmsford in the county of Essex before the Queen's Majesty's judges, the 26th day of July, anno 1566, which is anno Domini type thing, right?
Year of or whatever it is. So this is back in the day when basically independent thought would have you branded as a witch, or people would just call out, if they didn't like you and you were female, they could basically just accuse you of being a witch.
Pretty much. It was if you did something they didn't necessarily understand, they would be witchcraft, any type of science that they were there's no way, but this pamphlet was written by John Phillips. It's not a complete record of the events that occurred, but it does include the testimonies of the three women that were accused of being witches at the time. So, 1542, Henry VIII passed an act against witchcraft, making the practicing of magic, illegal, right? Taboo. His actions opened up doors to a broader range of trials and witch hunts. We all know about, Salem witch trials, what is the whatever.
Malleus Maleficarum, I think it's
Yeah.
called.
Yeah. We all know about the Malleus Maleficarum, that book that people use to, hunt witches with. But when Henry VIII passed this, he did so supposedly in answer to his belief that Anne Boleyn was a witch that manipulated him using spells.
That guy, dude. That guy. Holy shit.
So during this time, it's thought that Agnes was around 40 or in her 40s, maybe being born around 1503. It really does depend on the source you read from, which is why you can't really just read one source on the internet and be like, yeah, that's the answer, But it's really hard to find an exact birth year. Her early life isn't really well documented. It's mostly just the witch trial. And then there are a few random facts about her life. But overall, it's mostly just what she was accused of and how they went about doing all that stuff. So she lived in Essex, England. Some believe she got her nickname of Mother from her societal station. So she's a single woman. Maybe she was compassionate and helpful. And maybe she was known as a type of healer or a wise woman or something like that. That would lead people to think she's performing some type of magic or witchcraft. From what's been documented, everything in her life was kind of going on as usual until 1566, when she, as well as the two others, Elizabeth Frances and Joan Waterhouse, written about in the Phillips pamphlet, were accused of witchcraft. Not to be confused with the Reynolds pamphlet that, Hamilton wrote to confess about all his hoe activities. But Joan Waterhouse was related to Agnes, so it was her 18-year-old daughter. And
wow, that's pretty messed up.
Yeah, so in a pamphlet from a 1579 trial, it was reported that Elizabeth Frances was actually Agnes's sister. So it was like two sisters and a daughter/niece. All three of them were accused of witchcraft. But anyway, Agnes was accused of using witchcraft to cause disease and eventual death of someone named William Finn, who was a neighbor. He died November 1st, 1565. So the year before, this guy dies. Next year, the three of them are accused of witchcraft. She was also accused of using sorcery to kill livestock, cause other illnesses, and even kill her own husband. Lucky for her daughter Joan, lucky or unlucky, I don't know, but she's originally accused to have been a part of this witchcraft. She's found not guilty. She actually turns on her mother.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, Elizabeth, in order to protect herself. So, Elizabeth and Agnes, not so lucky. She kind of backstabs them. They're thought to actually practice the magical arts and kind of have to go through this whole trial, right? So during their trial, Elizabeth is examined first. She confesses to possessing a familiar, which is like a white spotted cat that's named Satan or Sathan. Depends.
Wow.
It's Satan, just spelled different, right?
If you are a witch and you have a familiar, why would you name your familiar Sathan? Like, no one's going to notice how close it is to Satan. I'm like, just hypothetically speaking, if she actually was, it's a pretty bad name for your familiar. Just saying.
So in her confession, she claims to have received this cat from her grandmother, who supposedly taught her witchcraft when she was 12 years old. Her story continues that the cat spoke to her in a weird, hollow voice and would do anything she wanted in return for a drop of blood. According to her, the cat would instruct her on how to prepare different potions, and kind of knew about all these different herbs. She also confessed to stealing sheep and killing several other people, including someone named Andrew Biles, who was a wealthy man who did not marry her after she became pregnant with his child. So apparently the story goes that she wanted someone, and so the cat brings her this guy. Like, she wanted to marry this guy. The cat's like, okay, well, you're going to have to let him abuse you. And so she does. And then she gets pregnant, and then the guy doesn't want to marry her. And so the cat then supposedly teaches her how to concoct a potion that would terminate the pregnancy, which she does. And then later on, she eventually gets married to someone else. And in this marriage, she is absolutely unhappy with the relationship, but everything that she wants to happen, she asks for help for. And then the familiar makes it happen, but then she's never happy. She just keeps wanting more and more and changing things. But she's unhappy with this relationship. She has a daughter and she's unhappy. So she gets the cat, supposedly gets this cat to kill her child, the 6-month-old baby. But, you know, it supposedly the cat does it of its own accord or something. Like, she says that she believes there's a reason that it did it. But she also supposedly causes her husband to become lame. But maybe she was unhappy because her husband was already so lame. According to the pamphlet, a toad was in her husband's shoe. And when he was putting on the shoe, he's like, whoa, what is this? And, you know, a whole bunch of stuff happens, but eventually the toad familiar causes a lameness in his leg. Whether it's like a poisonous frog or what, I'm not sure. But
so, okay, she quote unquote confessed to this, right? Like, this is just shit that eventually at the end of the trial that it's just stated she said she did this stuff.
Yep. Apparently, Elizabeth was the first to be accused and then in turn accuses Agnes. She supposedly later gave this cat to Agnes after 15 or 16 years to act as Agnes's familiar as well. And she gives her this cat in exchange for cake, supposedly.
Wow. It's a good trade.
So that's her story, right?
I love cats. I'd give a cake away to get a cat.
So Agnes confesses to having the cat kill one of her pigs in order to prove its power to her. So she's like, I'm going to test you out, see if you're like legit. Go kill this pig. And it does. It supposedly teaches Agnes witchcraft too. So supposedly she keeps the cat in a pot lined with wool, turns it into a toad because the cat's too much to handle. Toad's easier to manage, right? She also confesses to sending the cat to hurt other neighbors, one of which was called Wardall, supposedly going so far as to damage his goods. I assume it's like livestock or things he's going to sell at market, something like that. Supposedly, because of Wardall's strong faith in God, he comes out unscathed. Like nothing bad happens to him because of his belief, right? Then there were livestock animals that were killed because of some arguments between neighbors and community. So any disagreements, anything, they're like, she's obviously killing the livestock. That's what they think. So continuing on, Joan, her 18-year-old daughter, was curious about this cat or this familiar, and she wants to see it while her mother is away and plays with it, does all this stuff. She claims, though, that she never learned or practiced any witchcraft. So she just played with this thing like it was a pet and would use it to play jokes on neighbors and things like that. One of which supposedly is Agnes Brown. But there's a bunch of stories when it comes to Agnes Brown that kind of a little bit different. So this girl, Agnes Brown, not to be confused with Agnes Waterhouse, who this topic is about, right? So Agnes Brown is a young girl. She's 12 when she describes seeing a demon. And she describes seeing this black dog with the face of an ape, a short tail, and of course horns, because what demon doesn't have horns? So this big, weird creature, Agnes Brown claims to see.
So I was going to say up until that point, it sounds like it's actually just a small ape she saw, but they always have to toss in horns because that's what makes something evil. Like you said, like otherwise it could have just been something that looked just like an ape, but
right.
It has to go and have horns.
And she claims that this creature has like a silver whistle around its neck. She claims that she never sees a toad or a cat. And to me, all of this is coming out of a 12-year-old. So I don't know if she feels the need that she has to exaggerate these things. Maybe she doesn't like their family and she just wants to cause trouble, you know. Maybe she didn't see these creatures at all. Maybe she did. In her story, this entity asks her for butter, to which she says no. And despite being denied this, the dog creature just apparently has this milk house door key, uses this key, somehow it has it, opens the door and just grabs stuff for itself. It's just like, you're not gonna give it to me, I'm just gonna go get it. Chill. She also says this dog returns later with a knife and threatens to kill her, saying that he would stab her in the heart with a knife.
This is pretty fucking weird. Like, it's definitely
coming from a 12-year-old,
turn.
you know. So those judging the trial claim that this story points to Agnes Waterhouse as having put a spell on the young girl with malevolent intention. The most quote-unquote incriminating evidence was that Brown claims when she asked the dog who his dame, quote-unquote dame, was, this dog points its head towards Agnes Waterhouse's house.
Was the dog put on the stand to testify for this? Like,
this is all hearsay from Agnes Brown.
Okay.
From a 12-year-old girl. But the judges are like, well, sounds legit. That's incriminating. In another version that I came across, Joan was hungry. The 18-year-old, she's hungry. Her mother didn't leave food, so she goes to neighbors, asks for bread and cheese. She comes across Brown, who refuses to give her any food. In both these stories, it sounds like Agnes Brown is just a rude kid. But Joan returns home, and the familiar offers assistance in return for Joan's soul, to which she accepts. So Satan/Sathan goes to visit Brown and finds that Brown is churning butter. This entity turns itself into a dog demon, like in the previous story, and asks for some butter, to which she refuses. And so the dog creature kind of just terrorizes Brown. That's what they decided.
It's going to turn into something to ask for butter. Why would it turn into a dog demon in order to do it? Like, turn into something that she'd be like, yeah, sure, here, have some butter.
Who knows? And on July 29th, 1566, 2 days after the completion of the trial, she, as in Agnes Waterhouse, is executed by hanging.
Jesus.
She supposedly asks forgiveness from God before her execution. When questioned about her religious beliefs prior, she claims that she prayed, but only in Latin, as the cat, the familiar, forbade her from praying in English. She admits to all the accusations of the differing acts of witchcraft. It's unknown if Agnes was a real witch or not. Maybe she was just an innocent woman who was manipulated by the judges in order to force Elizabeth and Agnes into confessing falsehoods, which in this day and age really is not uncommon. Happens all the time.
Yeah, false confessions are definitely a thing that have been around for a long, long time.
Right.
And in a case like this, I can only imagine once she's executed, they can basically state whatever they want is how the trial went or what she admitted to and shit like that.
So Agnes is executed first, but Elizabeth is given a lighter sentence, only to be hanged on a separate conviction 13 years later.
Wow.
Which is nuts. But apparently Agnes has since become an icon of this unfair treatment. And it's like an icon of all the witch hunts, right? This unfair, just crazy set of circumstances, like all these events that happened, not only in Europe, but these things that affected people all over the world. And there are a number of folk stories that have been created and told about these two, most being created decades after their death, of course, because so much happens post-mortem, right? But yeah, that's the story of Agnes Waterhouse, the first woman to be executed in Europe for witchcraft.
Wow. That is fucking crazy, dude. Like, it's very sad and it's all very dubious because it's nothing but hearsay and it's all told by the people who wound up executing her after the fact. So
it's sad that her daughter turns on her to save her own butt.
I do wonder, too, if she told her daughter, like, tell them whatever they want to hear. Like, blame it all on me. That way you can survive,
That sounds like a mom thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So I wonder if that was the case. But either way, that's a pretty sad, unfortunate thing that happened. And
poor, unfortunate souls.
It only wound up getting worse when it comes to putting witches on trial, as we all know. So maybe one day we'll cover the full, witch hunt thing that went down. But it is substantial. So this individual case was enough for a single topic. So it'd be kind of hard to just sort of glance over all the stuff that happened with like witch hunts. But Either way, good topic, Robin.
Thanks.
All right. So before we move into my topic, we're going to take a quick commercial break. And we are back. So this week I wanted to cover something that actually scares me, but not in the traditional sense. Because like sometimes we'll cover aliens or demons or ghosts or possessions, etc. But one of the things we've only covered a few times is amusement parks. And it's not exactly the same as how we've covered it before. So in the past, we've covered amusement parks like when we talk about haunted ones or abandoned ones, or amusement parks that have to do with like a murder case or true crime in general.
Right.
It's related to something specifically. But I'm going to talk about a specific scenario that I think of kind of a lot. So I think the best way to title this episode is just to go with theme park accidents, which is what I'm going to do. So my favorite rides when I go to places like Disneyland or California Adventure or Knott's Berry Farm or Six Flags, they're always roller coasters or something similar like a thrill ride. Like I love Guardians of the Galaxy, like the free fall thing is fun, but it's like within the elevator.
Solid ride.
Yeah. So like it makes me think I'm going to die, and that's kind of what I want, but not completely, So
what the hell?
The older I've gotten, my need for speed has pretty much stayed the same. I still want to go fast, but I read a lot more now. I do research on stuff all the time that I think might be a good topic, and it's usually either something terrifying or morbid. So I have another voice in my head now, or I mean, it's my voice, but it's a new like thing it's saying to me before I get on rides, which is this going to kill me? And don't get me wrong, I've always had the thought getting on a thrill ride of like, what if something happens, But when I got on a ride like that, I just dismiss it. And usually it's a general thought of like, what are the odds of that? Like, what are the odds that something happens, like a catastrophic failure or something specifically happens to me, like a bird flies in my face, like Fabio when he went on that fucking roller coaster, if anyone remembers that or who Fabio is. But just so you know, the odds are very low. They're very low, especially at more reputable places with better maintenance on the rides and less to worry about overall. I actually looked this up, and this is according to the internet, but multiple sites do state that based on how many amusement parks are in the United States alone and how frequently those rides run, there is roughly a 1 in 16 million chance of you getting injured on a ride. Not just dying, but injured. So that's pretty low.
That's not too bad.
So I should also mention getting struck by lightning, you have a 1 in 700,000 chance. That's apparently a lot more likely than getting injured on an amusement park ride, which doesn't sound right. Basically, if you're on an amusement park ride and you get struck by lightning, it's confirmed that God hates you. So
I think it's just rides pump so many people through them that's why the odds are so much lower, because it counts by per capita or whatever.
It's
right?
like how like air travel is the safest travel because planes are constantly going. They have so many passengers per plane, and so many flights come in and they're safe. But when like one of them goes down, like you instantly start thinking, oh my God, like that plane crash, that could have been me. Because, if you fall from 35,000 feet in the sky, it's very unlikely that you're going to survive. But regardless of all that we've just gone over, accidents do happen. And sometimes accidents can be deadly. So, yeah, what I'm going to do now is tell you about a bunch of ride failures that will stick in your brain, and probably my brain, the next time you go and get on a thrill ride. But before I dive into that, I want to talk about a couple of Adam things here. And the first is that I have been on a ride before where I actually thought I was going to die. Not just like kind of scared or like was really intense, where I thought like, this is it. Like, this is how I go. And when I was a kid, I used to go to places like Six Flags in Chicago and Indiana Beach, which is in like central Indiana. And those are like the two main theme parks in my life. But I was a wee lad and I was too small for the big rides when I was younger, especially. And especially the scary ones, which were the good ones. Those were the ones I wanted to go on. So one of the places that had okay rides, where I could go on a lot of them, was the county fair. The Porter County Fair, to be specific. in Northwest Indiana. Now, this is not a knock on the county fairs. They do feel slightly less safe as an adult, just being objective, you know?
They are not safe.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say that most of those rides are, you know, not safe, bordering on dangerous when you just look at them. But there was a ride at the Porter County Fair that was like a roller coaster. You know, it had like the cart that you get into. You sit 2 per person. You had the shoulder harness thing that comes down and covers you to keep you from flying out of your seat. And it like locks you in place. But there wasn't a track that it would run on. It was just a big loop, you know? It's like this cart that had like, I don't know, 12, 16 people in it would just go into a loop. And they would move you back and forth, slowly getting enough momentum to like have you do a full rotation. You do a few loops, and then you slow down just enough where the operator, right before the ride was over, would have you like get to the top and like hang upside down for like 5 or 6 seconds. Then you'd come back down, and then slowly you would stop. And that's the ride I wanted to go on. And finally, we went to the Porter County Fair one year, and I got on my tiptoes, and I was just barely able to reach the line that said I could go on the ride. So I did. Me and my brother got on it. And at first, it was a fucking blast. It was everything I dreamed it would be. It was faster than anything I had been on. I was going upside down. But then we came towards the end of the experience. And we got to the part I was most excited about, which was hanging upside down. And as soon as we started hanging and we stopped in place, I realized why size requirements exist. Because wee lad Adam was not thick with 2 C's like adult Adam is, and I started to slide right out of the fucking shoulder harness, and it was absolutely terrifying.
Horrifying.
Like, I just felt myself like, this thing is not fucking holding me in. There wasn't an open roof. It was kind of like a cage, but the top of the roof had like this panel that was cut out that like you could have fallen through. So if I would have fallen completely out of it, I would have had to somehow like grab onto the side of like the chicken wire that was part of like these individual cages for these 2 people carts to keep from falling out. And I was absolutely terrified. And my brother reached over as I started to slide, and he basically like grabbed my chest and like held onto my shirt, and he held me enough in place to keep from falling all the way out. And when the ride finally moved again, I was in absolute tears. Like, I'm sure we were only upside down for that 5 to 6 seconds. But when I remember this, like this core memory of just fear, it feels like minutes, possibly hours that I was hanging upside down, and it's awful. And we eventually...
It just makes me not want my kids to ride rides.
I will never let my kid go on a ride that looks like that. I'll be like, fuck that. You want to go on a ride? We'll go to Six Flags. We'll go to one where it's probably not going to happen. This is way more likely. But like, when we finally came back down, everyone was looking at me, because I'm sure they heard me crying and screaming that I thought I was going to die. And they're like, wow, this kid really can't handle his rides, because I was just a fucking mess, you know? And I couldn't articulate what had happened to me. I was just like, I almost died. But that's probably where my deep-seated fear of like heights comes from. And it's probably where my desire to confront that fear comes from, because people were such assholes about it. But when I get on rides nowadays, I don't really freak out. I acknowledge the possibility of death, just like when I get into a car or get on an airplane, more than I have in the past nowadays, probably. But once we get going, I'm typically all smiles. Except for one kind of ride. And it's those stupid carousels where they have like the seats that you sit in and like you buckle yourself in, but it's on really long chains. And then it like raises you up in the air, and then they spin you, and all the chains like kind of like lean out, so you kind of lean out, and you don't go that fast.
Like the symphony swings at Disneyland.
Exactly.
Or California Adventure.
Whenever I'm on those, I always spend around at least 50% of the time thinking to myself, if the chain snapped right now, I'd die. And I would get flung somewhere, and then I like look and like calculate my trajectory of where I would hit. And it's just like, once I'm done thinking about like, I would land right there on those people, like, I like look at the next thing and I'm like, I would land right there on like where they sell hot dogs. I'd be impaled by all those hot dogs. And it's just something that I can't control. It's something that still happens to me to this day. And that idea of being thrown off of a ride is only present on that specific one. But that does bring me to my first story tonight, which took place on August 31st, 2005 in East Farmingdale, New York, at an amusement park called Adventureland. And the ride was known as Top Scan, which is kind of a weird name, but hey, we'll go with it. So it was not one of those chain seat carousels like I just described. It was actually a ride where it was like a car that you would sit in. Like you'd all sit down, kind of like a roller coaster, where you're like shoulder to shoulder, and it's a 6-seater. And there's 6 different like arms. So imagine like a star with 6 points, except they're just lines. They're not like intersecting or anything like that. Like an octopus that only has 6 arms, okay? You all sit down. And it kind of looks like teacups, like you're going to get spun around. But once the ride starts going, it like lifts you up and tips you. And then you realize like this thing that you're sitting in that you have the shoulder harness for can like flip around. So as long as like the driver or whatever, the operator of the ride is like spinning you enough, like you'll be like, at an angle and you'll also be spinning. And that's what was happening. This ride got up there and it started spinning like that. And at first it started out normal and then it got up to full speed. And as the ride was spinning and twirling, one of the passengers had their shoulder harness just break. It just broke off.
Oh my God.
And when that happened, she was flung from the ride in midair. And I know this sounds like, did this really happen? Because there's all those wives' tales, or there's like, you go to Six Flags and people tell you like, oh, someone died on that ride. Like, especially when you're a kid, like kids just make shit up. This is 100% something that happened, even though I know it sounds like one of those stories, but it is 100% true. So now that I've confirmed that this is true, you may hear that and think, well, how high were they? How fast was it going? And I will say it was high enough and fast enough that when they found her, she had landed on top of a parked car in the parking lot.
Oh my God.
She was flung that far. And that poor car.
Person.
Yes, she was dead, by the way.
Well, no. Just imagine being the owner of that car, going to your car, and you're like, there is a dead person.
I did not leave this dead person here. How did they get on my car? I mean, it would be absolutely horrific for like anyone involved. It 100%
like
is.
Everyone had to fan out to look for this one woman.
Yeah, everyone
right?
looked for her.
So
everyone
sad.
crossed their fingers and hoped she's okay. And unfortunately, she wasn't. So they closed that ride down and it actually never reopened. That same ride, like, because I don't know if you guys know this, but like roller coasters are typically not specific. Like, you build a specific type of roller coaster as a manufacturer, you show it to people that have amusement parks. And you're like, I can sell you one in Dallas. I can sell you one in California. I can sell you one in Germany. Just call it something different, paint a different color scheme, but the ride is the same. And that happens a lot. And this particular ride, the Top Scan ride, it actually has multiple iterations that are still in operation. And in fact, they're still in operation in the United States. Like maybe you heard this story and you're like, man, I really want to ride that. Well, you're dumb, but you can. I will say too that a ride named Space Roller, which is the same thing, it failed in 2010 at a county fair in Miami, but the malfunction only wound up locking it in place in the air, and they had to get the firefighters to go get two passengers off because their harnesses wouldn't release. So they had like a cherry picker up in the air as they like delicately like released their harnesses and had them like jump into the cherry picker and got lowered back down to earth. Maybe you're still thinking you want to go ride this. There are still 3 models that are operating in the United States of this. One is called
Tell me where.
the Samurai at the Lagoon Amusement Park in Utah. One is called Electro Spin at Carowinds Amusement Park in North Carolina. And one is called Sol Spin at Knott's Berry Farm in Southern California. So...
Wait, what?
Yeah, it is 100% in operation, and I knew I recognized the fucking picture of this thing.
Is that the one we always go on?
I don't know what you always go on, but all I know is this thing is
the
fucking...
Soul Spin one, the one we always go on.
That's the one.
It's like it has arms that stick out,
Yup.
and then it makes you rotate and spin.
That's the one where the harness failed, and the chick was thrown off of it and died. So, if you want to try it out, Robin apparently has... Go for it.
We go on that almost every single time we go to Knott's.
Well, you're gambling with your life every time you step onto it.
Because it spins really fast.
Yeah.
Right? When it's rotating. And
imagine the worst scenario of your harness breaking.
It jerks you, the harness breaks, and you smash straight into the ground.
You didn't tell me this ride was going to jerk me. Now I'm kind of... No, I'm kidding. But yeah, it's still in operation at a place Robin has been to, and apparently she has ridden it. So 10,000 patron goal. We'll both ride at the same time. JK, not really, but seriously, go for it. All right, moving on. So the whole fear of being a kid who is just like slightly too small and getting onto a ride is the actual opposite of what happened recently, very recently in Orlando, like 2 months ago. There is a ride in Orlando called the Orlando Freefall Drop Tower. And it's one of those rides where like you sit down in a shoulder and then you like sit down and you have the shoulder harness, like the end of Zombieland, where they get on the thing that like lifts them into the sky and then it just drops you. The Orlando Freefall was titled as the, quote, world's tallest freestanding drop tower, which attracts a lot of folks. And it included a 14-year-old boy on March 24th of this year. And I call him a 14-year-old boy, but this kid, He was a big kid. He was 6'5" and 340 pounds. He is the size of an NFL lineman. The ride seats are rated for 250 pounds, which is something I'm going to keep in mind if I ever think I might want to go on one of those, because I am over that weight limit. And apparently, to accommodate folks who are a little bit taller and a little bit heavier to get them on, at least in Orlando at this particular park, they had 2 seats that they manually adjusted against the engineering recommendations to allow for bigger folks to sit in those seats. So he gets on the ride at 6'5", 340, and the person comes to check their harness, and despite the fact that it is not down far enough, he turns to the operator that's going to press the go button, and it shows that it's down far enough because they had adjusted this themselves so that they could get bigger people on the ride. Probably because they got yelled at by someone who couldn't go on the ride because they were too big. So this kid gets on the ride. They give it the all clear. The thing raises 430 feet into the air and it drops. And when those rides drop, they have they catch you. You drop for a while and what's, a free fall, which it's really not. And then the brakes hit. And when the brakes hit, he slid straight out of his seat. In fact, when the ride had come to a stop and everything was said and done, his harness was still down. That's how loose they had adjusted this harness to fit someone in there. And it was so loose that someone who is 6'5" and 340 pounds slid right out when the brakes hit. So he, of course, didn't come to a stop when he slid out. He did survive the fall initially, but he passed away at the hospital that night. And it is absolutely horrifying to think that an alteration that was made to the ride against the wishes of the engineer cost a 14-year-old kid his life. And as a person who is heavyset, I think scenarios are like this a lot when I get on rides, because sometimes they have to push the fucking harness down and then decide is this guy too fat to be on the ride? I've been told multiple times, you can't go on this ride. Sometimes my legs are too long. Sometimes I'm just too fat. We were at Knott's Berry Farm, and I can't remember the name of the roller coaster we went on, but they came over and they pushed my harness down. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, I've lost 30 pounds. I should be able to go on this ride. And he kept looking over at the operator in the booth, and she kept shaking her head
the hang time one.
And they did this 5 or 6 times, and finally he pushed it down. I swear to you, it didn't click again. It didn't go down any further. And he looked at her, and I swear she shrugs. Yeah, whatever. Let's just fucking send the dude. And they let me go on it. And I was already strapped in. And that's the ride that takes you all the way up to the highest point and then tips you over the edge. So your harness is the only thing keeping you from falling out. So you can stare at certain death before the roller coaster lets go of the brakes and you just take off. And I'm on this fucking ride. And this had just happened to this kid, thinking this is how I go. Why the fuck did I get on this ride? And it's just horrifying to think this is something that actually happens. And who knows, maybe that's the seat they chose me, or they thought oh yeah, he can sit in that one. But it's horrifying to know that this sort of decision absolutely did cost someone their life. And someone had loosened that seat to try and accommodate them. And that decision is something that'll probably haunt that person who made the adjustment for the rest of their life. So
right.
It's I get nervous about a lot of things when I go on rides, because you always think what could go wrong. One of the things that always makes me wonder while I'm on a ride is when you're on a water ride, like Splash Mountain or anything that has a water track that you follow. Because at some point you get to a gate, and the gate closes so you don't go down a drop. It's waiting so that the people that are in front of you have moved enough where when you go down the drop, you do not smash into them. And every time the gate shows up, I think to myself how does that gate know? We're good to go. What if the gate's wrong and I'm about to plummet into another car? And I think that every single time, which is exactly what happened at Dreamworld theme park in Queensland, Australia. I think this one was 5 or 6 years ago. The ride was called Thunder River Rapids. If you've ever been on Grizzly River Run at Disneyland California Adventures, it's 6 people to a raft that's everyone's sitting in a circle where you're all looking at each other.
They have a similar ride at Knott's too.
It is extremely similar. And I'm going to post pictures of all these rides that failed, by the way. Not their actual failure point, except for one of them that we're going to get to. But on Thunder River Rapids, it was a 6-person raft that was floating down a river. It has twirls and drops. On October 25th, 2016, there was a group of folks on the ride like normal. Near the end of the ride, they got to a spot where they seemed to have a low water level, and they wound up getting stuck on a track. Now, what happened here was that one of the 2 large water pumps that actually feed into the ride, suddenly during this time, malfunctioned and it was no longer putting water into the end of the ride. So these folks are like by this conveyor belt that's supposed to lift them up, and they can't actually get on the conveyor belt because there's not enough water to get them there. So they're just stuck on this track. And while they're stuck there, they're probably wondering what's about to happen. So 60 seconds later, another raft that had a full group of 6 passengers comes down a drop with all this momentum, and they collide into the other raft. And like when two things collide like that, they kind of like carry the momentum forward and they both push up. Like if you take your right hand and your left hand, you make them flat, and you have your left hand push into your right, it just naturally goes up like tectonic plates making a mountain, you know? And when this happens, it is...
one flip upside down?
No, not exactly, but close. It is catastrophic what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and read you a description of what went down. If you're squeamish, you might want to jump ahead like 60-ish seconds. So I'm going to read the description of the accident. So you've been warned. Once the rafts had collided, both of the rafts move forward and they kind of lift up in that fashion. When this happens, the conveyor belt that was supposed to be moving them basically helps them shift further. What happens is the first raft that couldn't reach the conveyor belt finally gets grabbed enough where it starts moving up, and then it slides back down. When it slides back down, it hits the second raft, which is now standing straight up, so that the people are like perpendicular to the ground. And when that happens, they fall out of the raft. When they fall out of the raft...
they don't have seatbelts?
I mean, it's just like, do you have a seatbelt when you go on Grizzly, whatever? Like, I don't know.
Yes.
It's not enough to keep you from falling out if the thing basically capsizes. But when it does that, the second raft is pushed more by the conveyor belt. So it's standing straight up. And at that point, when the passengers either fall out, this is the two things that were going to happen to them. They either fall out off the ride entirely, or they are, quote, trapped in close proximity to the conveyor mechanism, which led to fatal injuries for 4 passengers, end quote.
Oh, man.
That is some Final Destination shit. They fell into the conveyor belt gears and died. There were 4 people of the 6 who died. They were all adults or young adults. The only 2 survivors were children. They somehow survived this accident, but witnessed the grisly fucking death of 4 of their fellow passengers. And that's one... that's kind of fucking horrifying because I love those rides and I don't worry about them as much as other ones. But that's like the most deaths in one accident that I found doing my research on this one. And I could probably do another topic just like this one. But when I read it, I was like, oh my God, that's something out of a horror movie.
Which is funny because I just watched The Final Destination last night for like the 5th time
you watch
this month.
So many horror movies so often, and you never used to watch them. It's so funny. So here's another one that's really crazy, and this is what happens when there's a catastrophic failure on a ride. So I think we've all seen the rides where it's like a giant pendulum, where like it starts out as like a big pole basically, and you all get onto like whatever it is. Sometimes it's a boat, sometimes it looks like a big ass raft, sometimes it's just like everyone's sitting facing the same way. And once the ride starts, it like swings to the right and then swings to the left a little bit further and back and forth. And eventually you either get like perpendicular to the ground or maybe like you go like 75% of the way up. It just depends on which one you're on. So those ones are really fun. I used to like doing those as a kid because there wasn't a like huge height requirement before I got tall. And there was an amusement park in the city of Ahmedabad in India. And they had a ride just like that. The ride was called Discovery. And it seated 32 people because those rides can typically fit a bunch of people onto it.
There's also one of those at Knott's.
Figures. So in July of 2019, a full group of people got onto that ride just expecting to swing back and forth. I actually sent this video to Robin so she could react and tell you what it's like. But on those rides, like I mentioned, like you go back and forth, slowly gaining more and more momentum. And when it got to the point where it swung to the right and it was about perpendicular to the ground, there was a catastrophic failure of the actual pendulum itself, right near the center where the entire thing, like that large fucking pole that holds the entire ride, just snapped. And as it snapped, the top part of the pendulum swung further down because there's no counterweight. And likewise, the basket that's holding all these people also swings down. But the catastrophic failure was below the center point, closer to the cart, closer to the thing that's carrying all the people. So it swings down and it just smashes into the support legs of the entire ride. And once it smashes into it, there's maybe a split second, but that top part of the pendulum finally breaks loose. And when it breaks loose, the thing completely falls to the ground. I'd say it was like 20 or 30 feet up when it fell too. But it's something that's so shocking when you watch it. Like, people don't freak out right away. They're like, whoa, like, what the fuck just happened? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your reaction when
really
you watched
terrifying.
it, Robin?
The video you sent me, you can literally see someone getting launched from this ride as it's falling down. It is absolutely terrifying.
I'd like to think that person survived, like, somehow clearing themselves of the wreckage. Because I think, okay, here's the thing. Of the 32 people, 30 survived, most with severe injuries. They did recover. 2 of them passed away. I think one or two of them passed away because when that basket swung back, it just smashed into the support legs. And I think where it collided, there was a couple people sitting there. It's very hard to see. I have a picture that I'm going to post of the ride where you can see like it start to bend. I don't want to post anything that anyone might find too gruesome, but I do want to show you like what it looks like when this fails. There was an investigation. All these, by the way, have investigations and like millions of dollars in payouts for the families. In this particular case, this amusement park in India had basically not been maintaining any of their rides beyond the point of functioning. And all the massive bolts and rivets that had been put into this thing to make sure that it could like sustain the weight had rusted and corroded on multiple parts of that ride. It was just a matter of time before it failed, and no one had been investigating it. So it is tragic, but at that point it had become inevitable. But it was at a point where you couldn't really see it unless you were like climbing up the thing to inspect it. So definitely super tragic. So we've had harness failure. We've had equipment being tampered with. We've had mechanical failure. We've had catastrophic failure due to negligence. This last one I'm going to cover is the craziest of all these to me. There is a place known as Wisconsin Dells. It's in, you guessed it, Wisconsin.
Okay,
in the US of A. I've actually been to Wisconsin Dells multiple times. Growing up in the Chicagoland area, you go to Six Flags. Then you also go to places like Cedar Lake, or I think it's called Cedar Lake or Cedar Point. I forget which. And I think that one's out in Ohio. I don't remember going to any of them in Michigan. And then like Wisconsin had some, Illinois had some other ones, but Wisconsin Dells was one that was pretty famous, at least back home. I used to go to Indiana Beach all the time too, but no one cares about that. So it's another large theme park, even though it might not be as famous. So it has like small locations within it. You know what I mean? Like Frontierland and, you know, all these other things. But they have a place there now called Extreme World.
Okay.
And as you can probably guess, it has the most extreme rides at the park. So I feel like local theme parks that aren't as big as Disney, but are trying to be well known, they try and become famous for something, you know, and it's usually a ride. Some theme parks are like, let's go with some ridiculous food. Like we'll serve you a burger that's like served between 2 donuts or some shit like that.
I hate that. I think
a lot of theme parks.
I think it's so gross.
I do too. And a lot of theme parks, they decide to go with a ride. So like the biggest wooden roller coaster in the world, which used to be the Hoosier Hurricane at Indiana Beach. It didn't last for very long, but it was a giant wooden roller coaster and I used to love it. Or like the tallest free fall tower of death or whatever they called it at the one I just told you about in Florida. Like there's a bunch of free fall drops. That's what they hung their hat on. Like we're the tallest, 430 feet. Some places know they're not going to have like the fastest or the biggest or the tallest. So they kind of go with a gimmick. And when they go with a gimmick, they have to like make some shit up. Extreme World at Wisconsin Dells had one of those gimmick rides. And this ride is essentially 4 pillars that rise up that are coming to a point gradually. And it's like 4 legs that are standing up. Think of like the Eiffel Tower without the bending. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like one of the big towers that holds like all the electrical lines. Like it looks a lot like that. At the center of it, it has a mechanism and like wires to lift something. And that something is like a cage. It looks like an old timey elevator, except that in the middle of it, and probably like a 6 by 6 foot square, the cage itself is probably more like 10 by 10. There is a floor that drops out. So this thing will rise up, and when it gets to a certain point, the floor will drop out. The person who's on it, because it's one person at a time, will be in a harness, and they'll like dangle out over this 6 by 6 foot emptiness. And then someone who's in there, who's like a ride technician, will just pull a tether and they free fall. And I don't mean free fall like the tower. I mean, they literally have fucking nothing attached to them. There's no cart. There's no like shoulder harness. They just drop 100 feet into a fucking net. So the whole thing is like 140 feet tall.
That
you drop 100 feet and
like
you land in a net.
the stupidest shit I've ever heard.
I know. When I read this, I was like, why would anyone fucking ever go on this? Because it's like, you know, circus performers train their whole lives and they still have a fucking net. And a lot of the injuries that happen to people that are doing things like circus performances are because they landed in the net wrong. You know, you can get hurt landing in a net too.
Right.
But here's the thing about that net. When the ride is not in operation, the net is not suspended. It's on the ground. So when you're being raised, once this thing is like raising you up and it gets to 100 feet, that's the point when the net starts getting raised off the ground to be suspended like another 40 feet in the air. So sounds like a bad idea. And in the summer of 2010, it was. A 12-year-old who is definitely braver than me decided she was going to go on this ride. What's its name? The Terminal Velocity. As a side note, it takes falling for 1,500 feet for a human being to hit terminal velocity, so your ride name is not accurate. Anyways, she was being brave. She's taking pictures. There's all these pictures of her before she goes on it. There's apparently a family video from her dad recording when she went up. And as she's ascending, she's going up and up. She gets to the point where they have her like hanging over the center. And before she gets to the top, before it's ascended its full length, the operator releases her. And she falls 100 feet. But the problem is that she was only up 100 feet. So there is absolutely no net waiting to catch her. That net is on the ground. And she falls 100 feet and collides with the ground.
Oh my God.
Nothing to stop her. The operator, who was later investigated and sued and convicted, said he, quote, blanked out, end quote, and forgot to do all the safety checks before he was clear to release her. Like, they're supposed to, like, check and make sure the net is up. Then someone down there is supposed to radio and say, like, yeah, you're good. Go ahead and drop her. And they're supposed to wait. If it's windy, they're supposed to make sure that you're not, like, swinging back and forth. They have to wait until you're standing still and then let you go. I've watched a lot of videos of this ride being done, and I'm pretty sure it's still in action. But that's still a pretty big fucking blank out mistake to make. It's not like you missed your exit.
It's like a kid
because you were like
died.
daydreaming about an argument. Like, you dropped a fucking 12-year-old 100 feet to the ground. But there is a reason I saved this one for last. And it's because she lived. She fell 100 feet over 10 stories to the ground and survived. She did not land on her legs. She suffered multiple fractures of her spine, multiple fractures of her pelvis. She lacerated her liver in multiple places. She lacerated her spleen in multiple places. She lacerated her intestines in multiple places. And she had severe swelling of her brain and was in critical condition for weeks. The craziest thing about this entire story is that in a couple of years after the incident, she was walking again. Like, there's a video of her, like, going back to the hospital where they did her rehab, and she's using a walker, and she's moving pretty slow, and she, like, sets it aside and is able to take multiple steps without it, and she looks pretty good. It is absolutely shocking that she was able to survive. Like I mentioned, the operator, he got sued, he got convicted. It's like some form of criminal negligence that caused a severe accident. The family wound up settling with Wisconsin Dells for, like, an undisclosed amount of money over the incident. And even for someone who looks for thrills, I would fucking never get on a ride like that. Like, I've seen enough janky rides like Indiana Beach and some other places to be like, nah, fuck that. That's only going to be in operation until someone gets hurt. And this thing was in operation. Someone got hurt. And because they declared like it was all the operator's fault, they opened it back up, which is fucking bizarre to me. I don't think it's still in operation, but I couldn't find confirmation of whether or not that is true. But it's certainly one of those things where you would look at it and be like, this isn't safe. This is some Wile E. Coyote shit. Like, why would I ever want to try this? And unfortunately for this girl, she did get severely hurt, but she survived. It's been 12 years, and from everything that I can find, she is alive, and it seems like she has made a full recovery. So all that stuff just kind of reinforces that thought in my head that, like, it could be you. But like I said, the odds are pretty low. Like, low enough where I'm willing to risk it for most of those rides.
Yeah. I'm definitely a big roller coaster person, so.
Yeah, and honestly, too, when I'm standing, like, next to a new thrill ride, I'll sit there and I'll be like, everything's going to be fine. This is going to be a blast. I can't wait to understand this ride. Because, like, the second time you go on it, you kind of know when to, like, lean your body weight one way or the other. And it's really fun. But for that first time, I'll be sitting there like, May 23rd, 2022. He thought this would be a normal ride. He was wrong. And that, my spooky friends, is theme park accidents.
Thank you for that horrifying topic.
You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed it. And I can't wait to go to the LA County Fair when I'm out there with you and Disneyland.
I'm not writing anything, man. I'm not writing anything.
Yeah, it'll be super interesting. And I understand the fear that some folks have, but for certain things that are like in a very controlled environment, I think that fear is relatively minimized. Nothing's ever 100% safe, but hopefully it's as safe as it can be. So either way, thank you all for listening to this episode of Scaryish. We appreciate you. If you have a story you would like to share with us, it doesn't need to be about these particular topics, but it can be supernatural, spiritual, coincidental, true crime, or extraterrestrial nature, or even something outside of that. Feel free to email us. Our email is storytime@scaryish.com, or you can go to our website, scaryish.com, and click on Contact Us. Fill out that form. It comes directly to us. Or you can hit us up on our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scarishpodcast. Twitter is @scarishpod, and Instagram is @scarishpodcast. Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/scarishpodcast. Those are monthly donations. Tiers start at $1. At $1, you get ad-free, so that's Q. Ad-free is the way to be, as Adam would say. If you're not into the monthly donation type thing, you can also go to coffee, ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast. Again, all your donations just go to helping us keep the show running. Because we're the show runners.
Keep this rig a-rolling.
But yeah, thank you everybody for sticking with us, sharing us with your family and your friends, and yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate all the support we get from you folks. It's always amazing, and we are eternally grateful for it. But that is everything we have. So Robin, why don't you go ahead and sign us out?
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.